Hello guys, we're back again with yet another episode 2. Woo, 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 woo. So today I'm joined by a special guest. I'm joined by Oscar. Oscar, do you want to say hi?
Hello!
So Oscar, he knows a lot about art. He's really into the art world. He does his own artwork. And we're going to be talking about being a creative in the art world, as well as how to look after yourself and what self-care actually means. So before we delve into all of that, Oscar, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Hi everyone, I am Oscar. I'm a freelance illustrator. I'm doing a degree in graphic design at the moment. And I pursue a lot of different creative things. I'm self-funding an album that I'm doing, which will take a very long time to make. Yeah, and I've just fallen in love with all of those things for a very, very, very long time. And I love comic books and nerd culture and all of that.
So as you can see, Oscar's like a really well-rounded person. So you said that you do comics, or you like reading comics. If you had to name your top 3, what would you pick?
Ooh, oh, that's really hard. I love Elektra. I think some of her solo comics are some of the best that I've ever read. I think her character is really interesting. Mm-hmm. Storm has a solo series which is brilliant. Mm-hmm. There's a comic called Death Vigil, which is all about like the Grim Reaper and people who are, after they've died, given the abilities to help fight these demons that are trying to come into the planet, which was really, really good. And there's a comic called, I can't remember what it's called, but it's about an old American cartoon character reimagined as a closeted gay actor in the 50s who then gets put under subpoena during all of the un-American trials. Ooh. It's really good. Yeah. And it was really emotional.
Oh no.
That Snagglepuss or something, I think that's what it's called. It's really, really good. And also The Rat Queens is incredible.
Nice. So Oscar's told us about a wide range of comics that he enjoys reading. What about yourself? Do you do your own comics?
I do. I have written a fair few, as Cheyenne has seen me do when we were in secondary school together. I have written a fair few. They stay in my brain. Mm-hmm. Mainly, I always tweak and alter what they're going to be. Yeah. Because I'm always trying to improve the way I draw and the way I interpret the way the world works. Yeah. So I'm always kind of adding things in. And I think in a few years I'll be ready to start actually like finalising everything and start the process of self-publishing. Nice. Fingers crossed.
Love that for you. And I'm sure you'll do well once you come to self-publish. So your artwork, how would you categorise your artwork? Like, what's your distinctive art style, would you say?
I think it's a mix. I love fashion illustration. Yeah. I love that kind of vintage gowns, and I predominantly draw in 3 colours, which is black, white, and red, because red's my favourite colour. Yeah. But I also have recently kind of gotten into some kink art as well, which I find quite cool. Yeah. And I really like the idea of something that's quite beautiful and disturbing at the same time. Yeah. So like pin-ups, where if it was like a normal person, that it'd be really sexy, but it's like a demon.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. I like some weird stuff, but and then just like action sequences of different characters I enjoy.
Awesome. So someone who's looking to get into like comics or illustration, what advice would you give them?
For illustration, it's fairly simple. Just like do it. Yeah. And I think I am very similar to a lot of other artists, and we like to squirrel away things that other artists do. Mm-hmm. When I was learning, when I was very, very young, I used to spend hours, and I still do. I love watching other people draw, and I love watching other people create and looking at different things that they do and being like, oh, I'm going to try that and see whether that works. Yeah. And people are always like, oh, I could never do what you do. I'm not that naturally talented. And I genuinely think it's like 20% natural talent and like 80% the fact that I've done it every day since I was about 8 years old. Yeah. And it's like, if you do anything that much, you're going to get better. Yeah. And the only way you're going to get better is by starting. And you're always, I mean, I look at my artwork now and sometimes I'm like, yeah. and it's not true, but you're always there's always room for improvement because perfection doesn't exist. And with comic books, I would say figure out what kind of like genres you like.
Yeah.
And just go into a comic book shop and ask one of the staff members. They're always really ready and willing to help.
Yeah.
And because comics are such a wide spectrum of media, you can find like slice of life stuff. You can do the more sci-fi superhero route. You can do horror. There are some excellent horror comic books out there. But I think just ask. And I think there are quite a few, if you like social media, there are quite a few channels and stuff that review a bunch of different comic books. That is always a good way.
Is there one that you can recommend for the viewers to listen to?
Oh, highly recommend. Shout out to Casually Comics. I watch her videos religiously.
Yeah.
And it's also, she does a lot of videos about the history of comic books, which I find really interesting.
Yeah.
Like how Catwoman, one of my favourite characters, wasn't in print for a decade.
Really?
Because there was a period where everyone got really worried about comics' influence on the youth. So they brought in a committee to control what comic books could be released. And Catwoman was deemed to be a risk of corruption because she was so like sexy.
Yeah.
And so they were like, we can't use her for a while. And the Scarecrow wasn't in print for a long time as well. And I find all of that history really, really interesting.
Do you find that history kind of reveals itself a lot in comic books and stuff like that? Or
I think they're always sometimes in good and sometimes in bad ways. I think it's the same with like movies and stuff. Because sometimes you watch movies from the 50s and you're like, oh my God, this is awful. I recently rewatched Breakfast at Tiffany's and that film has some wild parts in it.
That's so true.
So I think it can be an interesting like time capsule of what like society might have been like back then, which sometimes is so bad.
Yeah.
But it can, if you find enjoyment in it, there's a series of comic books called Superman's Girlfriend Lois Lane.
Okay.
Which is some of like, there's one point where she is late for work and her car breaks down. So to get to work on time, she jumps off a cliff.
Oh my gosh.
Because she thinks that Superman will just save her, but he doesn't because he's off planet on another thing.
No.
And she just drops off a cliff and almost dies, which is wild. But really funny to me because that's just jokes.
Or who told her to jump out or something?
Right. Nobody told you to leap, ma'am.
Yeah. Do you feel like there's a lot of lessons that can be learned from comics?
I think not so much lessons. I always take away kind of some of comics can ask really interesting questions.
Yeah.
Like with Elektra, one question I always have really enjoyed the way people try and answer it is, if she was someone who died, why does she kill people?
Ooh, okay.
And like, there's a comic called Elektra Lives Again, which is really, really good, and it's after she's died, and it's Daredevil kind of dealing with grief, and the whole part of it is like, you are kind of at the end, you realise that she isn't haunting him, he's haunting her because he's not letting her go. And that idea of like the living haunting the dead is kind of a really interesting kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I like a lot of the questions that are raised by comics, like how do you deal with grief and how to fight and be strong and the different ways that can manifest.
It's true. So like with some comics, or should I say with some like superheroes, you get like the average everyday person that kind of assumes this like alter ego or like this power. Do you think that that's a nice sort of message for people out there who just think their life's like mundane? Or
well, I think I've always loved the idea of like, to make a movie, you need, nowadays at least, you need millions of pounds.
It's true. Yeah.
To do something on that scale, which is why Marvel movies cost so much.
Yeah.
To make a comic book of the same visual caliber, all you need is talent and a pencil and paper.
True.
And I've always enjoyed that because you can, if you exist in your head, as I do a lot, which can be a good and bad thing, you can find that. And the most interesting stories always start with people anyway.
It's true. Yeah. Okay, controversial question. Do you prefer Marvel or do you prefer DC?
See, now I can't get into this.
Oh, no.
No, I like them both for very different things.
Okay.
If I want my dark angst, gothic, gritty, I go to DC.
Yeah.
Or something more indie like Image or Dark Horse, they always do really good like gothic stuff. And if I want my like weird outcast but with crazy powers fighting the man, then I go to like X-Men and Marvel Comics, and they do different things for me, but I love them both equally.
Okay, I respect that. I would probably agree. Yeah,
they both have some kick-ass female characters, which is my bread and butter. I think male superheroes are so boring sometimes.
Okay, so let's obviously they're two different universes altogether. If you had to pit two superheroes together, so let's say for example Batman and Spider-Man, who do you reckon would win that fight?
See, this is I reckon Batman, because he's meticulous and borderline psychotic and definitely abuses children, and I think he's handled some insane people, but I also don't know how well he'd fare against someone without the time to plan, because a lot of his kind of abilities extend to his ability to like plan for every eventuality. So I don't know how well he'd do, but probably Batman.
You think he'd win?
Yeah.
Poor Peter Parker. Bye.
Well, I love Peter. He's great, but yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, do you prefer villains or superheroes within comics? What do you prefer?
I love it. I always kind of get on with more anti-heroes.
Okay, yeah.
Again, Elektra, who's not really an anti-hero, she's an assassin, for God's sake. But like Catwoman, where she's in like a grey area. But I love a villain. I'm a gay man. I love just a fabulous villain. Disney really did it with all of their very gay villains throughout the time. I think there's a lot of interest in why people do terrible things.
Okay,
and
that's
I
true.
think if you can make a really good story as to how you get to this place with a character, I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you say that like there's obviously the story behind these villains and as to like why they've got to the place that they are. So automatically that comes to head is like the Joker movie. When I watched that, like I felt really bad for the Joker.
Yeah, scarred emotionally from that film. I've seen it once and I don't think I'll ever watch it again.
Same.
I'm intrigued to see Lady Gaga in the second one though, because I have no idea where they're going with that movie. But yeah, I don't know. I thought that movie was really interesting. I know some people didn't like it, but I find it interesting because I think it's quite an... I don't want to say accurate, because I don't think that's the word. But it is a kind of chilling realization of how far people are pushed.
That's true.
Especially nowadays, and obviously in history as well. And what can happen to a person when the world gives up on them.
It's true. It's very true. It plays on some elements of reality as well, so like mental health and things like that.
What happens when you abandon someone and just leave them to their own devices when they need help?
Definitely. And trauma, and how trauma can like manifest in certain people and stuff like that. So.
And obviously not everyone who's dealing with trauma
well,
pulls a pistol on live TV. But, you know, especially with, you know, the issues happening in America and all that stuff, it is it's a lot more real than I think a lot of people give it credit for.
I agree. Why do you think that comic books or comic stories appeal to people of various ages?
Well, because I think they appeal to that kind of idea in a lot of us that there is always more.
Yeah.
And a lot of comics are, like the X-Men comics were a very kind of famous example of rooting for the underdog and, you know, being an outcast, which I think we all feel on some level.
Yeah.
And that idea of being othered and not living in a world that is quite the same as everyone else, which I think everyone feels. And how people deal with that. And also it's the spectacle of it. It's camp ridiculous fun. People put on capes and spandex like anyone would wear that for comfort or for fighting. It's wonderful. So I think the love of the ludicrous is definitely in there as well.
I agree. Do you feel, you mentioned the idea of like being othered and how they like represent people who might feel a bit different. Would you say that kind of like speaks to you and your story, or not really?
Yeah, 100%. Being gay is rough. I mean, obviously I am white and gay,
Yeah.
so there's, you know, privilege and oppression in a mix,
Yeah.
which is the same with my heritage, which is quite fine. But yeah, definitely. And, you know, mental health is rough. I'm a recovering drug addict, so there's definitely been times where I have really not been okay.
Yeah.
And I've always identified with that, because I think when you're little, it's different, because children are evil.
Yeah. Can be.
And can be some of the cruelest, because they don't understand empathy and they haven't developed that yet. So when you're like anything other than like a young boy who wants to play football, it can be very horrible. But one thing I've always been really lucky with is that I've always, like primary school and secondary school, I've managed to find a group of people like yourself who are just really supportive and wonderful. So like, even though like secondary school was at quite a few parts really horrible, I always had an amazing group of people around me who were always like, "We love you, you're doing amazing, you look so cool." Even though I look back on some of those photos and y'all are filthy liars, I did not look cool. with the hairspray hair, oh, rough.
Goals.
No, it is very much not goals. But you know, having that is always really important, and it does make me think of what happens when people don't have that, because it does happen and it does lead to some horrible things.
I agree. Do you think then that art or like creating comics and things like that has been sort of an escape for you, would you say?
100%. I spent most of my childhood daydreaming.
Yeah.
My mum used to call it Oscar Land, because she was always very understanding of me. So she would just kind of come over and be like, "Where are you right now?" Because she wanted to know what my brain was doing. And I don't know, I've always found I listen to music almost constantly. And it kind of helps my brain exist in somewhere else, which is more fantabulous, or more, if I'm writing a comic book, it can be more analytical because I'm very meticulous when I have action sequences in my comic books, because I want to know exactly how it's going to look. So it does help a lot.
I understand. So, like, do you use art as sort of like self-care for yourself, or like a way to promote self-love for yourself? Or
I certainly used art as therapy for a really long time. Now that I'm in actual therapy, I tend to do that less. But it's certainly, I think it's really good to like ground. Because you're only you, and you're just sitting in front of this like blank paper, and you can do whatever the hell you want. Which is a really nice, beautiful thing. But I would certainly recommend actual therapy, which also helps a lot as a way of like self-care, which is good.
So like, have you found that since going to therapy that it's like impacted positively on your creativity or your artwork? Are you able to be more focused, for example, more now?
I'm able to be a lot more business minded with it, because I struggle from the thing a lot of artists struggle with, which is valuing your own work. And it's helped me kind of get on with the things that I've been procrastinating about for a really long time, as it's like, it's not a big deal. And also actually paying for therapy myself has been a big motivator, because I'm like, I'm too talented to be this broke. I'm just gonna sell it all and that's it. And that has really helped. And it's also kind of given me the self-confidence to, there's this kind of thing going on at the moment with artists kind of clambering to have the lowest price point just to like sell something, and going through kind of healing and getting sober and doing all of that has kind of given me a lot more of supporting myself and being like, this is my work. This is something that I have done for decades, that I work really hard at, and if you want it, you are going to pay me the proper amount for it.
Good.
And you know, I think more artists need that, especially young ones.
Do you think then that like your perception of the world has changed since like going to therapy, and has it kind of changed your like world building in general? Like, has the worlds that you've created in your comic books, have they changed as well? Like, are they more vibrant, for example?
Yes and no. It's kind of helped me build
Yeah.
on the things that I started with, because a lot of my earlier stories kind of had a very simple premise, and I've kind of been injecting more interesting nuance to them. It's helped make my characters more three-dimensional, because as I understand my own mental health more, understanding how people's experiences can manifest in their existence, whether they're, you know, a superhero or in another world, I think always adds something more human, which will make them more engaging to the reader, hopefully, fingers crossed.
I agree. So do you feel then that, in a way, going through these experiences has helped you to create more likable or more relatable characters, would you say?
Yeah, not necessarily more likable, because I certainly, I'm not one of those people who needs to like a character as a person to kind of get on board with the narrative. I think you can have some really powerful stories that people really love, that the characters, pardon my French, dick. Like Scott Pilgrim versus the World. He is a terrible person for most of that movie, and it's one of my favourite films. And I think that's interesting. And I think we need more of that, because so often the hero and the antagonist are so like clearly defined. And I don't think life is like I don't think life is that clean cut. You've got good people make mistakes and do horrible things all the time, and it's how you deal with those things that kind of really shapes who you are. So I do think going through those things has certainly helped. They've shaped a lot of my work and a lot of my life, and the way I interact with a lot of the world nowadays.
I hear that. So then, what's your processes when it comes to like making characters? How do you actually do it? What's your way?
It varies. Sometimes I'll have an idea and want to put it down, and then sometimes it comes from the drawing process. So sometimes I will be doodling, or I like to draw without an end goal quite a lot of times, and I'll come up with a design that's really cool, and I'll be like, oh, where is this? What story is this telling me? Or I'm a very visual person, and I find music to be a very visual experience for me. So sometimes I've gotten like whole movie trailer visuals from like a song.
Oh wow.
That I can just see in my head, and then I kind of write the story based on that. Like there's a remix of Toxic by Britney Spears by a group called Two Way. Which is like, it sounds like a movie trailer song, and it's violins and like gunshots and like, oh, it's great. But that really kind of helped me write one of my newest stories, because the story was just, it was so clear in my head when I was listening to that song, and it was very like atmospheric, and it kind of just helped put me into that mood.
That's nice. So what's like an everyday day for you, like in terms of like creating these stories? Like, how does it go?
Obviously it's a side hustle, so it kind
I hear that, but still.
So my process changes. It's quite transient, although I'm trying to give myself more of a routine at the moment. Usually because I stew on stories for such a long time, when I sit down to write, it's actually really, really quick. I like a lot of forward planning, so, and I like to give myself a lot of time for my brain to kind of turn and flesh things out. So usually by the time I sit down to write, it's pretty much done.
Okay, cool.
And then it's a process of actually writing it, which does take a lot longer than it should. But procrastination is a bitch. And then it's usually the pencils, which do take quite a long time. Because laying out a comic page can be done in 1,000 different ways. But that's the kind of part I find really interesting, because I'm like, how can I portray this in a really visually interesting way that isn't confusing to look at? And sometimes I've finished it being like, this is incredible, and then like a month will pass and I'll look back and I'll be like, I don't know what the fuck's going on here. So it's a process. It changes. I find making time, I always give myself one day a week to do absolutely nothing.
Good.
And that kind of keeps me stable. because usually between university and work, I can be a bit run down.
Yeah.
So it depends.
Do you make time then to kind of prioritize not just like your physical well-being? So you say you rest, but do you do anything else for like your mental well-being as well?
Oh yeah, I gave up drugs and picked up skincare, and if anyone wants to tell you, they cost about the same. But it's a lot. I have really gotten into skincare over the last 2 years. I'm not like not a knowledge base at all, but I've tried a lot of different things, and it's less about the results and more about like the process, because it's time that I've dedicated to physically take care of myself. And it also feels real elegant.
Yeah.
And it can feel really like bougie, and you're spoiling yourself, and it's a nice part of the routine, because I do it before I go to bed, and it's helped me get to sleep because my body knows that that's what I'm doing, and then I go to sleep. And I also picked up makeup as well, which is really fun. I don't do it as often as I would like, because I cannot be bothered for that all the time, because I'm not doing like foundation and mascara. I'm doing like hieroglyphics on my face. I'm not just doing like a red lip, I'm doing like a red eyelid to forehead thing. Wow. But that's really fun as well. I find a lot of joy in kind of going all out on something that's uncomfortable but looks cool.
So you mentioned that like you used to have like certain habits. Outside of that, like what have you released from your life that has enabled you to kind of care for yourself even more?
Well, the drugs.
Apart from that,
the drugs was a pretty big thing.
Yeah.
And obviously, I'm an alcoholic as well, so alcohol with that. That was two of the biggest let go moments of my life. And it completely changed the way I lived. It changed where I was living. It changed the friends I have, because when I got sober, some of the people I was around just naturally weren't in my life anymore, which is fine.
Yeah.
But also, through going to therapy and making new friends that weren't in a toxic situation as well, it's kind of helped me learn what I expect and receive and give to friendships. And it's helped me kind of move away from the more toxic people that I had in my life, because I don't have the energy for it anymore.
True.
And we can live for drama, but like when drama is every day you speak to someone, then it's just it's too much, and it's not my job to fix people. It's not my job to be people's therapist or healer or anything like that, and it's not my job to take responsibility for other people's problems.
True.
I think friends and family are a wonderful support system when you're going through a hard time, but I think at some point you need to take responsibility for your own mental health and your own well-being. And I'm a very firm believer in it's not anyone else's problem to deal with your stuff. Because if you aren't taking any time to address it or process or deal with it, all you're doing is throwing it at other people. And I don't think that's very responsible, but I am learning to lean on people more when I need help, which is a process.
That's fantastic. And I just want to say, like, well done, honestly, so far for like the progress and the journey that you've made, because it's great to see like where you are now, and you look so good, and you're flourishing, and it's really good.
Certainly an interesting journey from the disappearing act I did a few years ago. But it's also been wonderful, like reconnecting with people like you, Natasha, Toby, Jade, all like that whole kind of lot from secondary school, which I vanished from when I was 19 for a few years because of addiction and all of that stuff. So it's nice being able to like reconnect, and obviously we're reconnecting at different points in our lives, so it's like, oh my god, you're doing great, this is amazing. Which is so nice to kind of be a part of again, which is nice.
It is true. But it's almost like a little butterfly, like sometimes you have to tuck yourself away to kind of like be reborn again, and that's basically what's happened, and you've come out on the other side a lot better, which is really good. If you could give one solid piece of advice for someone who's like struggling right now with any of the things that you've mentioned, or generally, what would you say?
If you're struggling with mental health issues or addiction in any form, AA saved my life. And there are multiple different forms of it for multiple different things. Being in a room of people who have been through exactly what you've been through is one of the most powerful experiences I've ever had. And it's wonderful because you can throw something out there being like, this is crazy. And someone across the room is like, oh really, I burned down a building. So you're just like, that hasn't been said to me. That was just a dramatic example, but it helps you put into perspective a lot of different things. And I would just suggest making time to be kind to yourself, because you can always build up. But once you kind of get to that low point, there's always somewhere else to go. And if you start making changes that can help you, even, and the world's gonna world, you're gonna have bad days, regardless of, what changes you've made. But one thing that's really helped me is having like foresight. So that when I'm actively in a bad place, I now know that will not last forever. And that next week I'll probably be fine.
You will.
And I understand that and I know that sometimes it feels like this is it, and it isn't.
That's true. I'm really glad for the insight that Oscar shared. From my experience and my perspective, I really feel like if you're religious or if you believe in God or a higher being, sometimes just sitting down and like praying, or even just having a moment to yourself to like reflect on certain things and to remember that you're not alone has definitely like helped me with a lot of the things that like I've gone through. So you can go to therapy. God likes those that help themselves, so definitely go to therapy, and then also spend some time in reflection or prayer. If you're not religious, then maybe just spend some time meditating. Or
also I don't participate in man-made religion, but I pray all the time.
Well, there we go.
It's part of AA. I pray all the time. Just believing in something bigger than you.
Oh yeah.
I believe in a whole bunch of different things. I believe AA is bigger than me. I believe nature is bigger than me. The universe, things beyond our control will always happen. And I pray all the time. It helps me kind of remember that things aren't that important. And one thing that being near death has helped me realize is that so many people treat so many things like it's the end of the world, and it's really not. And it's just like, it's fine.
It's
Breathe.
fine.
Center yourself. It's okay.
And like there's a season for everything, as you said. Like things don't last. Bad things don't last forever. It's just like a little rough patch that you're in, but you will come out on the other side.
And neither do good things, nor should they. That's not what life is about. But also I find that like advocating for yourself, unless you're using advocating for yourself to be horrible to people, that's a very different thing. And you should still go to therapy. But I think like advocating for yourself in terms of taking the time you need when you need it, and not apologizing for that, being like, I need a minute, and that's okay, and realizing that things take time.
They do,
because I think like social media and all of this, and I love social media, I think it's a beautiful thing that can be awful, but there seems to be this like mad rush to be like a millionaire by the time you're like 22.
And
I'm turning 25 next week, and I'm like, that was never gonna happen for me. But something can be fulfilling if it's not making you rich.
It's true.
Like with like my music and my side projects, because I'm funding them myself, and I'm very blessed to be able to do that. I don't really care whether they make money because I'm not doing it for it to be successful. I'm doing it because it's something that I want to do that will fulfill me. So I think doing things that fulfill you without so much regard. Obviously, being successful is an amazing goal, and you should want to be successful at what you do. But that shouldn't be everything.
If it makes you happy as well, then go for it. Definitely. So do you think then that it's important to take care of yourself first before you pour into other people, or do you think it's the other way around?
I think it's important to take care of yourself first,
Mm-hmm.
because you can't give 100% of 20%. And
100%.
it is more likely that you'll do something detrimental to someone else
Yeah.
when you aren't running properly.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I've noticed that when I'm an introvert, so I tend to, when I am low,
Yeah.
all I want to be is alone.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that my ability to interact with people when I'm really low just goes out the window.
Yeah.
And it's actually it's better for me and for other people if I'm just in my little cave that I can be in. and then I can come back out when I'm at 100, and then I can give everything that I need to the people around me.
That's true.
That I can give.
Yeah. I'm 100% in agreement with you. You have to take care of yourself first and make sure that you're good before you can pour into someone else, because you can't pour into someone else from an empty vessel. Do you know what I mean? And also hurt other people. So if you're not right in yourself, or if you're not in a good space, then it might be a bit more difficult to help somebody else.
Also, if you try and do that, the amount of time it will take you to recover from doing something like that is so much longer than taking like a day.
Yeah.
It can take weeks to like recover if you're like running around giving everything of yourself when you don't have much. Can take ages to claw back. And it's so, take it from me, it's so much easier to just take a day.
Yeah. Or two.
Fuck it, week.
Yeah.
Do you, girl? I support you. But yeah, definitely make sure that you are running at a good level.
Yeah.
And then you will notice that the people around you will be a lot better for it.
Mm-hmm. So do you feel like these people that you're surrounding yourself with now have, obviously they're not doing your comics and stuff like that, but have they impacted the way that you do your art, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, well, just from a level of like support in a way. It's I'm surrounded, I'm very fortunate. I have some very, very close friends at uni, and seeing new people see my work is always an interesting experience, because they're like, wow, it's amazing. Aww. And I'm a bit like, this old thing that I've been doing. So it is nice to kind of, it's always good to see your work through other people's eyes.
Yeah.
That's not the only way you should see your work, though. You should always have a stance, but getting feedback and growing from that is something that you should always strive to do.
What would you say to people who find it difficult to get feedback on like their own work? Some people are a bit sensitive, so they don't like hearing constructive criticism, maybe. What would you say to them?
I think probably my honest answer is probably dive into why you react like that.
Yeah.
Because usually it's not actually about what that person is saying. It's usually, so if someone looks at my work and says, "Oh, I think your line work could be a bit more detailed," and I hear that's terrible. Yeah. You're a terrible artist. You're a terrible person. Then that's an issue that I'm having with listening to people.
Yeah.
And I'm actually interpreting something that wasn't said. And if you realize that, like, I know the close people that I have around me aren't saying anything like that to try and tear me down or anything. I know they have a vested interest in seeing me succeed, and I know within myself that that's where they're coming from.
Yeah.
People I don't know is a very different situation, because I know obviously everything creative is subjective, and it's part of it that some people aren't going to like your work, and that's absolutely fine. But I think if you surround yourself with a very core group of people that you know only want the best for you, and that you can listen and take what they're saying and grow from it, but also know when you don't want to.
Fair.
Because there are certainly some things where it's like I have a love of violence, not like actual violence, but like cinema violence. I think it's really cool.
Well, like fight scenes.
Fight scenes. I think they're really intricate to make, and I find the workings of how they do that to be a really fascinating process. And my mum doesn't like violence. Yeah. So when she sees a piece of my artwork that has violence in it, I know she's not going to respond the best to it, because she doesn't like violence at all. Yeah. But I know that I do. So know when to like be like, this is what I do, and learn that there are always things that you can get better at, and take what you want and just leave the rest. Yeah. And don't, I always say, don't listen to people who you don't know whether they want you to succeed or not.
True. Everyone's intentions are not always the best, isn't it? So I agree. That's cool. So to people that are sending off their comics or are trying to delve into getting into comics, and they're sending off their work to other people to maybe try and be a part of that company or try and get recognized, what would you say to them?
Definitely copyright your work before you send it to them, because people be out here stealing like it's no one's business, and it's been going on forever. So always make sure that you have some legal standing behind your work. I don't think that sometimes if it happens that you'll be able to do anything, but always having that fallback is definitely a good way to go.
Yeah.
And also remember that you're sending your work to people who don't know you.
True.
And it's their job to be harsh. I have heard quite a few things about quite a few editors at different comic book companies and how harsh they can be.
Really?
But you have to understand that at that point it is a job.
Yeah.
And their job is to sell. And, you know, it's nothing personal.
Yeah.
And obviously there's a very big difference between harsh criticism and verbal abuse in the workplace. But, and try and understand where that line is.
Yeah.
Because people should always respect you regardless. And not everyone's going to, but definitely get your work copyrighted or some form of that beforehand. And just have fun with it. I mean, you know, you're drawing people on a page fighting. I mean, there has to be a level of humor to that. And, you know, you have to be able to have fun with it.
True. If you could work for any comic company in the world, where would you work? Who would you work for?
I would probably work for something that's a little bit more low-key.
Okay.
That I'd probably have a bit more creative freedom with. So like Image or Dark Horse would be a really fun place to work.
Okay.
Just because I know that some of those smaller companies, you're less part of a huge conglomerate that will have a lot of rules.
Yeah.
And I read some of these indie comics and they're just phenomenal. Because you can tell the writers and the artists are having so much fun. Because they're more free to kind of do that. Whereas if you're like, you can't jump on a Batman comic and just do some rogue decisions. You can't be like, he's dating the Joker now.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, I would 100% read that story because that sounds wild. But, you know, probably somewhere where I could be a little bit more freer. But at the moment, I'm kind of gearing towards just self-publishing and seeing what happens with that. But we don't know. The world has a lot of possibilities. We shall see.
True. The world is your oyster. You mentioned self-publishing. Can you briefly tell us or outline the differences between like self-publishing and getting published like the traditional route? Like, what's the difference?
I'm not hugely sure. I have researched it a little bit, but ideally, you would have to go through a publisher and then you would get paid a certain amount of money as an advance and then make a certain amount based on the percentage of sales that you would get. Usually, if it's through, like... see, Marvel and DC operate in a very different way. They operate under the kind of idea that you are paying for services rendered.
Oh, okay.
So, if you are a comic book artist, you don't really own your work. Because you're getting paid to produce work for them. Yeah. Similar to like if you're an artist and you get paid commission for something, it's like a commission-based system. So self-publishing, it's similar to the music industry. So if you self-release or if you're like a little one-person crew, you usually will own a lot more of what you're making, and you'll probably make a bit more money, but you won't have the wide reach and distribution of a bigger company.
So all in all, what would you tell people? Which route would you tell people to go down?
Oh God, I don't know. I think, you know, like working for Marvel would be a great gig. And I know that your like contract for Marvel or DC wouldn't be like decades, so you know, it would be a great like foot in the door to be able to release something yourself and then do a few years at a bigger company and then go back. But I think it works differently for everyone. I know I follow a few comic book artists who seem to be having a blast just doing superhero shit at Marvel and DC and having a wild ride doing that. So I think it's just up to the individual. If you want to go through the like strain of self-publishing and all of the work that entails, it can be incredibly rewarding. But just do what feels right for you.
I like that. Yeah. If you looked at your artwork from a year ago and the way that you've progressed until now, would you be proud of the progression that you've made?
Yeah, well, oddly enough, I just went through all of my artwork from the last, I think, 5 years.
Yeah.
Because I've decided I'm just going to sell it all because there's no point in it staying in my house and just taking up space. And I was shocked at how good some of it is.
Aww.
I know that's a really egotistical thing to say, but like I was just looking at it, and there were some pieces that when I did them, I was like, this is garbage. And then I looked back on them, and I was like, that's actually lit. Like, what is going on? What was I thinking? I was so blind. And, you know, it kind of always, it's that kind of rule among a lot of different artists where it's like, if a piece isn't working for you, step back from it for a while.
Yeah. And
then come back. Like, I did a piece yesterday, and I was like, this is bad. This is really, really bad. No. And I looked at it this morning and I was like, that's actually really good. I don't know what I was saying. I can definitely do something with this. Yeah. So, you know, distance certainly helps because it's always good when you're in it. It can be a really intense process.
True. Yeah.
And stepping back can sometimes be the best thing you can do because sometimes you get so involved that you really can't fix the problem because you're so like in it and the emotions are high and you're in your like creative zone. And sometimes you just need that moment of like, I'm going to go away for a while and eat popcorn and come back tomorrow and see what I can do. Taking a break is certainly a really good thing to do, especially with creative processes, I think.
It just sounds like a tool for life. Take a break, eat popcorn. It's all right. Yeah.
It will solve a multitude of problems. More people should be taking breaks because some of y'all out here crazy.
Literally. So all in all, like, it sounds as if art has in a way saved you.
Oh, in every way. Art has saved me in more ways than I will ever be able to count.
And thank you so much for being here today. You provided a lot of insight into like comic books, into like self-help and self-care and a bunch of different things as well. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah. I've had such a wonderful time. I adore you and I'm so happy that you're doing this because this is like, I've been bullying you to do something like that you should be doing for a very long time, and I'm seeing that you're now in a place to begin all of that, and I'm just so excited to see where it goes.
Thank you. Yeah. But I'm sure we'll have Oscar again on the channel at some point. So yeah, thank you guys, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.